A student invites his friend home, trusting his mom's warmth, but a joke about her sparks suspicion. Following a shocking discovery, he confronts their betrayal, leading to an explosive rift. Watch his journey from trust isolation, ending in a quiet, cold distance. I invited my buddy Mark over to hang out after class, figuring it'd be a chill night at home. I'm a student, juggling lectures and exams, and he's a guy who always lightens the mood. We grabbed some snacks, chips, and soda from the kitchen and crashed on the couch, controllers in hand, ready to dive into a game. My mom, Elena, popped in to say hi, her usual warm self, asking if we needed anything. Mark grinned, eyeing her, and joked, "Man, if you got a mom like that, who'd you even take after?" We all laughed, me, him, even Mom, and I shrugged it off, thinking it was just his usual teasing. It didn't hit me then. The night started easy. We played a few rounds, the TV blaring with game sounds, and I was killing it on the screen while Mark trash talked. Mom brought us a plate of cookies, saying, "Don't stay up too late," and left with a smile. Mark chuckled again, muttering, "Seriously, dude, your mom's cool," and I rolled my eyes, saying, "Yeah, she's all right." We kept playing, the room filled with laughter and controller clicks, and I didn't think much of it. I grabbed another soda, the can cold in my hand, and figured it was just a fun night, nothing weird. We talked about school. Between matches, I complained about a tough prof, and Mark nodded, saying, "You'll ace it." He leaned back, munching a chip, and asked about my weekend plans. I said, "Probably study," and he groaned, "Boring." Mom walked by again, heading to the laundry, and Mark threw in another quip. "With a mom like that, you should be out more." I laughed, tossing a pillow at him, and said, "Shut up, man." She chuckled from the hall, and we went back to the game, the joke fading into the background. The house felt normal. I'd lived here forever. Small place, cozy, with Mom's cooking smells lingering. After the game, I grabbed a notebook, sketching some class notes, while Mark scrolled his phone. He said, "Your mom's got good taste. Those cookies rocked." I smirked, saying, "Yeah, she's a pro," and kept doodling. The TV hummed low, and I felt good. Friends, home, no stress. I made more tea, the kettle whistling, and brought him a cup, the steam rising. He thanked me, and we laughed about a dumb meme. The night flowing. Mark fit in. He'd been over before, but this was his first time meeting Mom properly. We'd met in a study group last semester, and he'd become the guy who'd crash at my place to avoid his noisy roommates. That night, we ordered pizza, the box greasy on the table, and Mom joined us for a slice, chatting about her day at work. Mark said, "You're lucky, man," with that grin, and I said, "Guess so." Laughing it off, she cleared the plates, and we went back to gaming, the joke a distant echo. I didn't overthink it. After pizza, we played another round, the score tight, and I won, cheering while Mark groaned. Mom called from the kitchen, "Keep it down, boys," and we snickered. He leaned over, saying, "Seriously, your mom's a vibe," and I said, "Yeah, she's cool," brushing it aside. I got up to stretch, the room warm, and checked my phone, texts from classmates about a project. I replied, sitting back down, and we kept playing, the night stretching on. The laughter lingered. Later, I made popcorn, the smell filling the room, and we watched a dumb action movie, throwing kernels at each other. Mark said, "Your mom should join us," joking again, and I said, "She'd hate this." Laughing, she peeked in, shaking her head, and went to bed. We turned the volume down, finishing the film, and I felt relaxed. Home was home. I cleaned up the bowls, the sink splashing, and figured the joke was just Mark being Mark. The night wound down. Around midnight, we called it quits. The controller set aside. I yawned, saying, "Crash here if you want." And he said, "Maybe next time." We fist bumped, and he grabbed his jacket, heading out. I locked the door, made a final cup of tea, and sat at the table, sketching a quick doodle. The house was quiet, Mom asleep, and I didn't think twice about the joke. The next morning, I woke up, made coffee, and got ready for class. The laughter from last night still a faint, harmless memory. Mark started coming over more after that first night, and it quickly became a regular thing. I'm a student, buried in assignments, and he'd swing by after class, crashing on my couch with his easy grin. We'd fire up the gaming console, munch on chips, and laugh about dumb stuff, professors, failed tests, you name it. Mom, Elena, got used to him too, popping in with snacks or a casual chat. It felt normal at first, like having a brother around. But then I noticed he'd linger with her sometimes, and a weird feeling crept in, though I pushed it down. telling myself it was nothing. The visits piled up. A few days later, he showed up with a six-pack, saying, "Thought we'd celebrate surviving that quiz." We cracked open the cans, the fizz loud, and played a round of our favorite game, the TV blaring. Mom brought us a bowl of popcorn asking, "You boys okay?" And Mark said, "Your mom's the best, man." I laughed, saying, "Yeah, she's cool." And we kept going. But when I went to grab more soda from the kitchen, I came back to find him chatting with her by the counter, laughing about something. I shrugged it off, joining them, but the moment felt off. It became a pattern. Over the next week, he dropped by 3 times. We'd play, drink, and mess around. Once we even tried cooking burgers, the kitchen smoky and chaotic. Mom helped, flipping patties, and Mark stayed close, asking her cooking tips. I said, "You're stealing my mom now?" And they both laughed, her saying, "He's learning." I grinned, but when I stepped out to answer a call from a classmate about a project, I returned to see them still talking, her hand on his arm for a second. I grabbed my controller, the game resuming, and ignored the strange tug in my gut. The lingerings grew. One evening, we ordered pizza. The box sprawled on the table, and Mom joined us for a slice, chatting about her day at the office. Mark said, "You've got a smart mom," and I said, "Yeah, she's a pro," laughing it off. After she left, I went to my room to grab a charger, and when I came back, he was still in the kitchen with her, their voices low. I called out, "Pizza's getting cold," and they rejoined me, but I felt that oddness again. We played another round, the score tight, and I sipped my soda, pushing the feeling aside. I tried to focus on fun. The next weekend, he brought a new game, and we stayed up late, the room lit by the screen's glow. Mom brought tea, saying, "Don't burn out," and Mark thanked her, his tone warm. I said, "She's keeping us alive," and we laughed. But when I went to the bathroom, I heard them talking, something about a movie she liked, and I lingered by the door, then shook it off, returning to the game. We ordered wings, the sauce messy on our fingers, and I told myself it was just friendliness. The night rolling on, the weirdness persisted. A few days later, he came over with study notes, and we worked at the table, books spread out. Mom brought us coffee, and Mark said, "You're a lifesaver," lingering as she poured. I said, "Yeah, she's the best." But when I got up to stretch, I saw him lean toward her, saying something I didn't catch. I sat back down, focusing on my notes, the coffee warm in my hands, and told myself it was my imagination. We finished studying, played a quick match, and I cleaned the mugs, the kitchen quiet. I started noticing more. One afternoon, we watched a football game, the TV loud, and Mom brought sandwiches. Mark stayed with her after, chatting about the match, and I went to grab a sketchbook, working on a drawing. When I looked up, they were still talking, her laughing at something he said. I joined them, saying, "You two are chatty," and they smiled, but I felt that tug again. We finished the game, the score close, and I made tea, sitting with them, trying to shake the unease. The moments added up. Another night, we played cards, the table cluttered with snacks, and Mom sat with us for a hand. Mark won, saying, "Your mom's my lucky charm," and I said, "Sure, take her," laughing. But when I went to the garage to get more soda, I came back to find him whispering to her, her nodding. I called out, "Game's waiting," and they split up, but the feeling grew. I dealt the cards, the room warm, and sipped my drink, burying the strangeness deep. I talked to myself. The next day, I jogged, the morning air crisp, thinking about Mark's visits. I told myself it was normal. He's a friend. She's friendly. Back home, I fixed a wobbly chair, the tools clanking, and Mom asked about my run. I said, "Good." But my mind was on those moments. That evening, he came over again and we played, the TV on. Mom brought cookies, and he stayed with her after I went to grab a book. I returned, saying, "Let's go." And they joined, but the unease lingered, a quiet hum I couldn't silence. The week ended heavy. Saturday, he showed up with a movie, and we watched, the room dark. Mom brought popcorn, and Mark thanked her, staying close as she said a moment. I said, "You're glued to her," joking, and they laughed, but I felt it again. When I went to the kitchen for water, I heard her laugh, his voice low. I came back, the film rolling, and played along. But inside, I started to wonder. That night, I lay in bed, the house quiet, and knew something was off, though I didn't want to face it. The next morning, I made coffee, watching Mom move, and pushed the feeling down, unsure what to do. Mark was over again, and it was turning into another typical night. But everything changed when I forgot my wallet. We'd been chilling on the couch, controllers in hand, blasting through a game with the TV's volume up. I planned to grab some beers, but when I patted my pockets, I realized the cash was missing. Mom, Elena, was in the kitchen, humming as she washed dishes, and I said, "I forgot my money. Be right back." Mark nodded, saying, "Take your time, man." And I grabbed my keys, heading out, the door clicking behind me. I didn't think twice about leaving him there. The drive was quick. I sped to my room on campus. The streets quiet, my mind on the game we'd been playing. I rummaged through my desk, finding the wallet under a pile of notes, and chuckled at my forgetfulness. On the way back, I stopped for gas, the pump clicking, and grabbed a snack, a bag of chips, to share. The night was cool, the car humming, and I felt good, looking forward to resuming our match. I pulled into the driveway, parking a bit off, and decided to check the window first. Maybe they'd started without me. What I saw stopped me cold. Through the living room window, the curtains slightly parted, I saw Mark and Mom together. They were kissing, slow and deliberate. And then he slid her shirt off her shoulder, her hands on his chest. I froze, the chip bag crinkling in my grip, my breath catching. The room was lit by the TV's glow, the game paused, and they didn't notice me. My legs locked, my mind reeling. Her laugh from earlier, his lingering chats, all flashing back. I stood there, hidden by the dark, unable to move, the betrayal sinking in. I couldn't process it. The image burned, her leaning into him, his hands gentle but firm, undoing another button. It wasn't a quick peck. It was intimate, planned. I dropped the chips, the bag rustling on the grass, and stepped back, my heart pounding. The window framed like a movie scene, and I felt sick, my friend, my mom. I wanted to bang on the glass, to yell, but my voice wouldn't come. I turned away, the night air sharp, and leaned against the car, trying to breathe, the wallet heavy in my hand. I forced myself to act. After a minute, I picked up the chips, brushing off the dirt, and walked the garage, my steps slow. I slipped inside, the door creaking, and grabbed some cash from a jar, enough for the beers, avoiding the main entrance. The garage smelled of oil and old boxes, and I stood there, the cold concrete grounding me. I thought about confronting them, but the image held me back. I got back in the car, the engine starting, and drove to the store, my hand shaking on the wheel, pretending nothing happened. The store was a blur. I grabbed the beers. The cashier chatted about the weather, but I barely heard. I paid, the cash crinkling, and drove back, the cans cold in the bag. My mind raced, her smile, his jokes, all eyes now. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked in, the door opening to the living room. Mark was on the couch, controller in hand, and Mom was in the kitchen, drying a plate. I said, "Got the beers," my voice flat, and he grinned, "Nice, let's play." I nodded, cracking one open, the fizz loud, and sat down, the game resuming. I played like nothing. We laughed, the TV blaring, and I sipped the beer, the taste bitter. Mark said, "You're on fire tonight," and I forced a smile, saying, "Yeah, luck." Mom brought a bowl of pretzels, saying, "Don't drink too much," and I nodded, avoiding her eyes. My hands moved on the controller, but my mind was on that window, her lips, his hands. I won a round, cheering weakly, and Mark high-fived me, oblivious. I grabbed another beer, cold, and kept going, burying the shock deep. The night dragged. We played for hours, the score tight, and Mom checked in, asking if we needed more snacks. I said, "We're good," my tone short, and she left, her footsteps fading. Mark said, "Your mom's awesome," and I mumbled, "Yeah," my stomach twisting. I focused on the screen, the colors flashing, and tried to laugh at his jokes, but it felt hollow. I finished my beer, the can empty, and got up to stretch, the room spinning slightly, the image still there. I held it in. Later, I made tea, the kettle whistling, and sat at the table, sketching to calm down. Mark joined me, saying, "Good night, huh?" And I said, "Sure," my hand shaky on the pencil. He left around midnight, fist bumping me, and I locked the door, the house quiet. I stood by the window, the curtains now closed, and saw nothing. I went to bed, the room dark, and lay awake, her face, his touch, replaying. The next morning, I made coffee, watching Mom move, and said nothing, the unclosed door haunting me. After seeing Mark and Mom through that window, I couldn't face walking to the front door. It felt too raw, too humiliating. I sat in the car for a minute, the engine off, the beer bag on the passenger seat, my hands still trembling from the shock. The image of them, kissing, undressing, stuck in my head, and I knew I couldn't just barge in. I grabbed the cash I'd taken from the garage jar, the bills crinkling, and decided to go that way instead. I slipped out, the night air cool, and headed to the side, the garage door creaking as I lifted it, avoiding the living room entirely. The garage was a mess. Old boxes lined the walls, the smell of motor oil thick, and a workbench sat cluttered with tools. I stood there, the concrete cold under my shoes, trying to steady myself. The beer bag rustled as I set it down, and I leaned against the car, breathing deep. I thought about confronting them, but the words wouldn't come. Pain and awkwardness held me back. I grabbed a rag from the bench, wiping my hands, and told myself to act normal to get through the night. The garage light flickered, casting shadows, and I moved toward the inner door. I forced myself inside. The kitchen was quiet, the dishes done, and I heard the TV from the living room, Mark's laugh cutting through. I set the beers on the counter, the cans clinking, and took a moment, my heart still racing. Mom's voice called, "You back?" And I said, "Yeah, got the drinks," my voice steady but hollow. I walked in, the game paused on the screen, and Mark grinned, saying, "Took you long enough." I forced a smile, saying, "Traffic," and handed him a beer, the cold can masking my shaking hands. We played like nothing. I sat on the couch, controller in hand, the game resuming with a beep. Mark said, "Let's see if you can beat me now." And I nodded, focusing on the screen, the colors flashing. Mom brought a bowl of pretzels, saying, "Don't spill," and I mumbled, "Thanks." A void in her eyes. Her hands, where they'd been, haunted me, but I kept playing, my thumbs moving, scoring a point. Mark cheered, "There you go," and I laughed weakly, the sound fake, bearing the turmoil deep inside. The night dragged on. We drank, the cans piling up, and I sipped mine, the taste sharp. Mark said, "Your mom's the same for these snacks," and I said, "Yeah, she is," my tone flat. She sat with us for a bit, chatting about a show, and I nodded, my mind elsewhere. When she left, I got up to stretch, the room warm, and grabbed another beer, the fizz loud. Mark said, "You're quiet tonight," and I said, "Just tired," brushing it off. We played another round, the score close, and I won, but the victory felt empty. I kept the secret. Later, I made tea, the kettle whistling, and sat at the table, sketching to distract myself. Mark joined me, saying, "Good game, huh?" And I said, "Sure," my pencil shaky. He left around midnight, fist bumping me, and I locked the door, the house silent. I stood by the garage door, the memory of that window scene replaying, and went to bed, the room dark. The next morning, I made coffee, watching Mom move, and said nothing, the garage my shield from the truth. I acted normal at school. The next day, I went to class, my notes a blur, thinking about last night. A friend asked about the game, and I said, "Yeah, it was fun," forcing a grin. At lunch, I ate alone, the cafeteria noisy, and replayed the image, her shirt slipping his hands. I shook it off, focusing on a textbook, the pages turning. After class, I jogged, the air crisp, trying to clear my head, but the weight stayed. I got home, the garage door creaking, and Mom asked, "Good day?" I said, "Fine," and went to my room, the secret locked inside. The house felt off. That evening, we had dinner, chicken and rice, and I ate quietly, her hands moving the plates. I thought about where they'd been, but kept my face blank. Mark texted, "Game tomorrow," and I replied, "Maybe," my thumb hesitating. I cleared the table, the dishes clattering, and sat on the couch, the TV on low. Mom watched the show, and I sketched, the lines jagged, the garage memory a barrier. I went to bed, her breathing soft, and lay awake, the pain simmering unspoken. I avoided the truth. The next day, I fixed a leaky faucet, the drip stopping, and Mom thanked me. I said, "No problem," but my mind was on that night. At home, I cooked pasta, eating alone, and Mark came over, the routine starting again. We played, the TV loud, and I laughed at his jokes, the sound hollow. Mom brought cookies, and he thanked her, lingering. But I stayed focused, the garage my escape. That night, I lay in bed, the house quiet, and knew I couldn't face it, not yet, keeping the silence like a shield. After that night in the garage, everything felt different, like a cold shadow had settled over the house. I couldn't unsee Mark and Mom through the window, and it changed how I looked at them. Mark came over the next day, his usual grin in place, and cracked a joke about our last game, but I didn't laugh. My chest tightened instead. Mom cooked dinner. pasta with sauce, and I watched her hands move, remembering where they'd been, and ate in silence. The warmth was gone, replaced by a detachment I couldn't shake, though I kept my mouth shut, just observing the unease growing inside. The shift was subtle. We sat on the couch, controllers in hand, the TV blaring, but I played mechanically, my thumbs stiff. Mark said, "You're off today, man," and I mumbled, "Just tired," avoiding his eyes. Mom brought us tea, the steam rising, and said, "Need anything else?" I shook my head, my voice flat, and she frowned but left. I sipped the tea, the taste bland, and thought about her laugh with him, her shirt slipping. I won a round, but the victory fell hollow, and I set the controller down, the coldness seeping deeper. I noticed everything. The next evening, Mark showed up with chips, and we played again, the bag crinkling as he opened it. He said, "Your mom's snacks are the best," and I nodded, saying yeah. But my mind was on that kiss. Mom walked by, humming, and I stared at her hands, steady on a mug, picturing them on him. I got up to stretch, the room warm, and grabbed a soda, the can cold, trying to focus. We laughed at a dumb play, but my smile was forced, the detachment growing, my silence a shield. The routine fell off. At dinner, chicken and rice. I sat across from Mom, her chatter about work fading into noise. I ate, the fork scraping, and thought about her excuse for being alone that night. Mark texted, "Game tonight?" And I replied, "Maybe," my thumb pausing. I cleared the plates, the sink splashing, and sat on the couch, the TV on low. Mom watched the show, and I sketched, the lines jagged, the coldness a barrier between us. I went to bed, her breathing soft, and lay awake, the unease a quiet hum. I watched them closely. The next day, Mark came over, and we played, the score tight. He said, "Your mom's a legend," and I said, "Sure," my tone dead. She brought cookies, lingering by the table, and I saw him glance at her, a look I hadn't noticed before. I got up to fix a leaky faucet, the drip stopping, and came back to find him chatting, her laugh sharp in my ears. I sat, the game resuming, and sipped my soda, the coldness hardening, my observation silent but heavy. The distance grew. At school, I zoned out in class, a friend asking about the game, and I said, it was okay, my mind elsewhere. At lunch, I ate alone, the cafeteria loud, replaying that window scene. I jogged after, the air crisp, trying to shake it, but the weight stayed. Home, I cooked pasta, eating solo, and Mark arrived, the routine starting. We played, the TV loud, and Mom brought tea, her hands trembling slightly. I nodded, avoiding her gaze, the coldness a wall I couldn't breach. I kept quiet. That evening, we watched a movie, the room dark, and Mom sat with us, her presence tense. Mark said, "Great pick," and I mumbled, "Yeah." My focus on the screen. She left, and I got water, the kitchen silent, thinking about her excuses. Back on the couch, I sketched, the pencil scratching, and Mark said, "You're quiet," but I shrugged, just thinking. The movie ended, and I cleaned up, the coldness a constant, my silence protecting me. The week dragged. Saturday, Mark brought a new game, and we played, the room lit by the screen. Mom brought popcorn, and he thanked her, staying close. I said, "You two get along," my tone flat, and they laughed, but I felt a shift. I went to the garage for soda, the door creaking, and stood there, the oil smell grounding me. Back inside, I played the score close, but my heart wasn't in it. I finished the beer, the can empty, and knew the coldness was my new normal. I observed more. The next day, I fixed a wobbly chair, the tools clanking, and Mom asked about my day. I said, "Fine," but my eyes lingered on her hands. At home, I cooked chicken, eating alone, and Mark came over, the routine looping. We played, the TV on, and Mom brought cookies, her smile forced. I nodded, sketching later, the lines uneven, the coldness a barrier. That night, I lay in bed, the house quiet, and felt the detachment solidify, my silence a shield against the truth I couldn't face. The coldness in the house had settled deep, and one evening, it hit me harder when I overheard something I couldn't ignore. Mark was over again, the usual routine, gaming on the couch, the TV blaring, chips scattered on the table. I'd been sketching in my room, the pencil scratching, trying to block out the unease from seeing them together. Mom, Elena, was in the kitchen, clattering dishes, and I figured it was just another night. But then I heard Mark's voice, soft and low. coming from the hallway, and something told me to listen. I crept closer, my heart pounding, and hid behind the door. The voice message started. Mark was on his phone recording, and I heard him say, "Hey, Elena, just thinking about you. Last night was amazing." His tone was tender, warm, nothing like the jokes he threw my way. I froze, my breath catching, as he continued, "Can't wait to see you again." My hands shook, the pencil dropping the floor with a soft thud, and I pressed against the wall, trembling. It was her name, my mom's name, spoken with a closeness that turned my stomach. I wanted to burst in to yell, but my legs wouldn't move. I stayed hidden. The hallway was dim, the kitchen light spilling out, and I heard Mom's footsteps, her humming stopping. Mark's voice went on, "You're incredible," and I clenched my fists, the betrayal slicing through me. The TV's noise covered his words from the living room, but not for me. Every syllable hit like a punch. I peeked around the doorframe, seeing him smile at his phone, and my mind raced. Last night, when I'd been out, had they been together again? I bit my lip, the urge to confront him boiling, but fear held me back. The tension built. I leaned against the wall, my back cold, and heard Mom call, "Mark, you need anything?" Her voice was casual, but it felt like a lie now. He said, "Nah, just finishing a call," his tone shifting, and I heard the message send with a soft ping. I shook, my knees weak, imagining her applying her hands, the ones I'd watched cooking, typing back. I wanted to storm in to demand answers, but the image of that window scene stopped me. I stepped back, the floor creaking, and prayed he didn't hear. I couldn't face it. I grabbed my jacket from the hook, the fabric rough, and slipped toward the garage, my steps quiet. The door creaked as I opened it, the oil smell hitting me, and I stood there, the cold concrete grounding me. Mark's voice echoed in my head, "Amazing, can't wait." And I felt sick. I thought about barging back, but the tremor in my hands won. I went outside, the night air sharp, and leaned against the car, breathing hard, the house lights blurring through my tears. I paced the yard. The grass was damp, my shoes sinking, and I walked the street, the silence loud. I thought about Mom's smile, her excuses, and Mark's laughs, all masking this. My phone buzzed, Mark texting, "Where'd you go?" And I ignored it, shoving it in my pocket. I sat on the curb, the concrete cold, and stared at the house, the curtains drawn, hiding them. I wanted to run back, to scream, but the weight of it kept me still, the overheard words a wound I couldn't touch. I tried to think. After a while, I stood, brushing off my jeans, and walked the block, the streetlights dim. I thought about calling a friend, but what would I say? I stopped at a bench, the wood wet, and sat, my mind on that voice message. The tenderness, the planning, it was real, not a fluke. I rubbed my face, the cold biting, and decided to wait, to figure out alone. The house loomed ahead, and I knew I couldn't go in yet. The betrayal too fresh. I stayed out. The night stretched, the air chilling, and I paced back, the garage door still open. I heard the TV stop, voices inside, and my stomach turned. I leaned against the wall, the bricks rough, and thought about confronting them, Mom's face, Mark's fear, but I couldn't. I went to the backyard, the grass soft, and sat by the shed, the silence heavy. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't check, just stared at the stars, the overheard words looping. I returned slowly. After an hour, I crept back, the garage door creaking, and slipped inside. The house was quiet, Mom in her room, Mark gone. I made tea, the kettle whistling, and sat at the table, sketching jagged lines. The warmth didn't reach me, the coldness back. I went to bed, the room dark, and lay awake, her name and his voice haunting me. The next morning, I made coffee, watching Mom move, and said nothing. The overheard true the secret I carried. The overheard voice message left a chill that lingered, and that night, dinner with Mom, Elena, turned into something heavy, a conversation without words. I come back inside after pacing outside, the garage door creaking shut behind me, and the house felt different, tense, like the air was holding its breath. She was in the kitchen, cooking chicken and mashed potatoes, the smell warm but hollow to me now. I sat at the table, the plates clattering as she set them down, and we faced each other, the silence loud enough to scream. I knew she felt it too, my knowledge, her guilt, hanging between us. The meal started quietly. She served the food, her hands steady but avoiding my eyes, and said, "Hope you're hungry," her voice soft. I nodded, saying, "Yeah," my tone flat, and scooped some potatoes, the fork scraping. The kitchen clock ticked, the only sound, and I stared at my plate, thinking about Mark's tender words, amazing, can't wait, and her name on his lips. She tried to chat, asking, how was class? And I mumbled, fine, my gaze on her hands, picturing them with him. The silence grew, thick and unbroken, her smile fading. I watched her closely. She cut her chicken, the knife clicking, and said, need salt? I shook my head, saying, no, my voice tight. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, and I held her look, letting her see I knew. The overheard message echoed, her laugh his voice, and I felt the betrayal deepen. She shifted, her fork pausing, and tried again. Anything new? I said, not really. My words clipped and looked away, the table a barrier. The tension was a weight, her guilt a shadow, and neither of us spoke it. The silence stretched. After a bite, she said, Mark seemed off today, tested me, and I said, did he? My tone cold. She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped water, the glass clinking. I ate, the food tasteless, and thought about that window scene, her shirt slipping his hands. She cleared her throat, saying, good game last night, and I said, yeah, my eyes on her face, unyielding. The clock ticked louder, the kitchen warm, and the unspoken truth filled the room. I stayed detached. She got out to grab bread, the loaf rustling, and offered me a slice. I took it, saying, thanks, but didn't eat. My mind on the garage, the curb, the overheard words. She sat, her plate half full, and said, you've been quiet, her voice careful. I looked at her, saying nothing, my stare saying everything. Her secret, my pain. She dropped her gaze, her fork still, and the silence roared, her guilt palpable, my knowledge a wall. The meal dragged. I finished my chicken, the plate empty, and pushed it away, the scrape loud. She said, more potatoes? And I said, no, my voice firm. She tried to smile, saying, long day, and I nodded, my eyes hard, letting her feel the weight. The kitchen light buzzed, the clock at 7:30, and I stood to clear my plate, the sink splashing. She watched, her hands idle, and I felt her unease, the silence tearing at us both. I observed her reactions. She sipped her water, the glass trembling, and said, need help? I said, I've got it, my tone distant, washing the dish. She stood, gathering her plate, and our hands brushed, the same hands I'd seen on Mark, and I pulled back, the contact cold. She flinched, her eyes meeting mine, and I saw it. She knew I knew. I dried my hands, the towel rough, and sat back down, the silence a chasm, her guilt a confession without words. The night settled. After dinner, I made tea, the kettle whistling, and sat at the table, sketching jagged lines. She joined me, saying, nice drawing, her voice forced. I said, thanks, my pencil moving, avoiding her. She left, the hallway dark, and I heard her sigh, the sound heavy. I went to the living room, the TV off, and stared at the couch where Mark had been, the coldness a constant. I went to bed, her door closed, and lay awake, the silence between us a scar. The next day was tense. I went to class, my notes a blur, a friend asking about dinner, and I said, it was okay, my mind elsewhere. At lunch, I ate alone, the cafeteria loud, replaying that look. I jogged after, the air crisp, but the weight stayed. Home, I cooked pasta, eating solo, and Mom asked, good day? I said, fine, my eyes on her hands. I fixed a wobbly chair, the tools clanking, and sat, sketching, the silence a wall. That night, I lay in bed, the house quiet, the wordless conversation still echoing. The silence with Mom had stretched thin, and that night, playing games with Mark pushed me to my limit. I had to confront him. We were on the couch, controllers in hand, the TV blaring with the game's soundtrack, chips scattered on the table. I'd been holding in the window scene, the overheard message, the wordless dinner, but the tension boiled over. Mom, Elena, was in her room, the house quiet except for our noise. I was losing on purpose, my thumb sluggish, when I suddenly hit the power button, the screen going black. Mark looked at me, confused, and I stared back, my voice steady. Was it just once? The room froze. Mark's grin faded, his controller slipped into his lap, and he said, what? His tone unsure. I leaned forward, my hands clenched, and repeated, that thing with Mom, was it just once? The air thickened, the TV's hum gone, and I saw his eyes widen. Fear creeping in, he shifted, scratching his neck, and mumbled, "What are you talking about?" But his avoidance said it all. I held his gaze, the memory of her shirt slipping, his hands, burning in my mind, and waited, the silence screaming the truth. He didn't answer. I stood, the couch creaking, and said, "Don't lie, I saw you." Mark's face paled, his hands fidgeting, and he looked at the floor, saying nothing. The kitchen clock ticked, the sound sharp, and I thought about the voice message, amazing, can't wait, proof he couldn't deny. I paced, the carpet rough under my socks, and said, "Through the window, Mark, you and her." He swallowed, his breath shallow, and stayed mute, the fear in his eyes confirming it. I stopped, my heart pounding, the confrontation real. The tension held. I grabbed a soda from the table, looking cold, and cracked it open, the fizz loud in the quiet. Mark said, "It's not what you think," his voice weak, but I cut in. "Then what?" "Tell me." He looked up, his eyes darting, and said, "I don't know," his light thin. I sipped the soda, the taste bitter, and sat back down, staring him down. The living room felt small, the curtains drawn, and I remembered Mom's guilty look at dinner. I said, "Just once," and he shook his head, the silence's answer. I pushed harder. I leaned in, saying, "How long?" And he flinched, his hands twisting. The TV screen was dark, reflecting us, and I thought about the garage, the curb, the overheard words. He mumbled, "AWOL," his voice breaking, and I felt the sting, weeks, maybe months. I got up, pacing again, the room warm, and grabbed a chip, the crunch loud. I said, "Wire?" And he looked away, saying, "It just happened," his excuse hollow. The truth hung heavy, his fear mirrored to my pain. The night dragged. I sat back, the soda can sweating, and said, "Say something." Mark rubbed his face, saying, "I'm sorry, man, but it didn't reach me." I nodded, my jaw tight, and thought about confronting Mom. But this was enough for now. The clock hit 9 o'clock, the house still, and I said, "Get out." He stood, his movement slow, and grabbed his jacket, the fabric rustling. I watched, the silence thick, his fear confession I didn't need to hear. I stayed cold. After he left, the door clicking shut, I made tea, the kettle whistling, and sat at the table, sketching jagged lines. The house was quiet, Mom's door closed, and I heard her move, the floor creaking. I didn't go to her, just sipped the tea, the warmth lost. The next day, I went to class, my notes a blur, a friend asking about a game, and I said, "It ended early," my mind elsewhere. At lunch, I ate alone, the cafeteria loud, replaying his silence. The weight lingered. At home, I fixed a leaky faucet, the drip stopping, and Mom asked, "Good day?" I said, "Fine," my eyes on her hands. I cooked pasta, eating solo, and thought about Mark's fear, the truth out. That evening, I jogged, the air crisp, tried to shake it, but the confrontation stayed. Back home, I made coffee, sitting by the window, and saw his text, "We need to talk," but I ignored it. I sketched, the lines uneven, and went to bed, the house silent. The first clash of scar. I avoided more. The next day, I worked on a project, the desk cluttered, and avoided Mark's calls. At home, I cooked chicken, eating alone, and Mom tried quiet night. I said, "Yeah," my tone flat. I fixed a wobbly chair, the tools clanking, and sat, the TV off. She watched the show, and I sketched, the coldness back. That night, I lay in bed, her breathing soft, and felt the confrontation's echo, the silence between us deeper, his feared truth I couldn't escape. The confrontation with Mark left a crack, and that night, it shattered when I finally faced Mom, Elena, about what I'd seen. The house was quiet, the TV off, and I'd been sketching at the kitchen table, the pencil scratching jagged lines, the tension building since the silence. She came in asking, "Want tea?" her voice soft, but I couldn't hold it anymore. I stood, the chair scraping, and said, "I saw you with Mark." Her face froze, the teapot clattering, and the outburst erupted, weeks of coldness spilling out. I yelled, "Through the window, you and him, kissing, undressing," and the room shook with my words. She stumbled. She set the teapot down, her hands trembling, and said, "What are you talking about?" Her voice shaky. I stepped closer, my fist clenched, and said, "Don't lie. I heard him too, that voice message, calling you amazing." Her eyes widened, guilt flashing, and she sank into a chair, the wood creaking. I paced, the floor cold, and shouted, "How could you?" The kitchen light buzzed, the clock at 8 o'clock, and I saw her hands, where they'd been, fidgeting. She whispered, I didn't mean for you to find out. And the betrayal hit harder. She tried to explain. She looked up, tears brimming, and said, I was lonely, okay? After your dad. Her voice broke, and I cut in, That's no excuse. I grabbed a mug, the ceramic hold, and slammed it down, the sound sharp. She said, You've grown up. I thought you wouldn't notice. Her justification weak. I stared, my breath heavy, and yelled, Notice? I saw it. The memory of that window scene. Her shirt slipping, his hands burned, and I said, You let him in my house. She wiped her face, saying, It wasn't planned, but I shook my head, the room spinning. The argument escalated. I said, How long? And she hesitated, mumbling a few months, her voice small. I paced the carpet rough and shouted, Months? With my friend. The teapot whistled, forgotten, and I turned it off, the steam hot. She said, He was kind. I needed someone, her excuse hollow, and I snapped, Not him. I grabbed a plate, the edge digging into my palm, and set it down hard, saying, You broke us. She stood, her chair scraping, and said, I'm sorry, but it didn't reach me. I laid it out. I stopped pacing, facing her, and said, I saw everything, kissing, undressing, that message. Her face crumpled, tears falling, and she said, It was a mistake, her voice pleading. I shook my head, my voice low. No, it was a choice. The kitchen sink dripped, the sound loud, and I thought about the garage, the curb, the silence. I said, You lost me with this, my words cutting. She reached for my arm, her hand trembling, but I pulled back, the contact cold, saying, Don't. She kept justifying. She said, I was alone, you were busy, her tone desperate, and I yelled, That's not my fault. The clock ticked, the room warm, and I grabbed my sketchbook, the pages rustling. She said, You don't understand. And I said, I understand betrayal. I threw the book down, the thud echoing, and paced again, the anger raw. She sat, her hands covering her face, and mumbled, It won't happen again. But I shook my head, the trust gone. The outburst peaked. I said, You think sorry fixes it? And she looked up, her eyes red, saying, I'll end it with him. I laughed, the sound bitter, and said, Too late. You already did. The kitchen light flickered, the teapot cold, and I thought about Mark's fear, her guilt. I said, This can't be fixed. My voice steady now, the anger settling into resolve. She stood, her chair creaking, and said, You're my son. But I said, Not anymore, not like this. The night closed. I made coffee, the kettle whistling, and sat at the table, sketching nothing, the lines blank. She left, her door clicking, and I heard her cry, the sound muffled. The next day, I went to class, my notes a blur, a friend asking about Mom, and I said, She's fine. My mind elsewhere. At lunch, I ate alone, the cafeteria loud, replaying the fight. I jogged after, the air crisp, but the weight stayed. Home, I cooked pasta, eating solo, and she said, We should talk, but I said, No. My tone final. I held my ground. That evening, I fixed a leaky faucet, the drip stopping, and Mom watched silent. I cooked chicken, eating alone. She tried, I'm sorry, but I said, It's done. I sketched, the lines uneven, and went to bed, her door closed. The next morning, I made coffee, watching her move, and felt the irreparable break, the outburst of line we couldn't cross. I left for class, the house quiet, the bond shattered. After the outburst with Mom, I knew I couldn't stay. Distancing myself was the only way forward. The house felt like a cage, her tears and excuses echoing, and I started planning my move. I found a small apartment near campus, the rent cheap, and packed my things, clothes, sketchbooks, a lamp, into boxes, the tape loud in the quiet. Mom, Elena, watched, her face pale, and said, You don't have to go, but I said, I do, my voice firm. I loaded the car, the trunk creaking, and drove off, the house shrinking in the rear view, a scarf forming inside I couldn't see. The new place was sparse. I unpacked, the boxes rustling, and set up a desk, the wood scratched. I made coffee, the kettle whistling, and sat by the window, the street quiet. Mark texted, We need to talk, but I deleted it, my thumb decisive. I cut him off, his fear, his silence, his hands on her, gone from my life. At school, I avoided him, nodding if forced, my focus on class notes. A friend asked, Where's Mark? And I said, Not around. My tone flat, the distance growing. I kept it formal with Mom. The first week, she called, saying, How's the place? And I said, Fine. My words short. We settled into brief check-ins. Her asking about rent, me replying with basics. I cooked pasta, eating alone, the kitchen small, and thought about her loneliness excuse, but it didn't soften me. One evening, she visited, bringing groceries, and said, "Miss you," her voice soft. I nodded, unpacking the bags, and said, "Thanks." The contact cold, the scar quiet ache, the silence held. I jogged, the air crisp, trying to clear my head, but the memory of that window lingered. Back home, I fixed a wobbly chair, the tools clanking and sketched, the lines uneven. Mark tried again, a call I ignored, his voice message erased. At work,